Welcome to the Trent England Show. It's Monday. Thanks for joining me at the end of our lunch hour here. We've got several interesting things to talk about. The first thing I want to do is break down this morning's United States Supreme Court decision in the Masterpiece Cakeshop case. A lot of people have been following this. And look, I'm going to tell you one thing up front. The media is spinning it one way. Other folks are spinning it another way. And I'll just walk through what the court actually said and did in this case this morning that has attracted so much attention. We talked about it back in the fall on the radio program when the Supreme Court took this case on, and we learned that there would be a decision in this case. Of course, this is one of those cases that started out with a couple of people going into a business and saying, if you disagree with us, we're going to try to hurt you, right? I mean, this is, I will tell you, I will break down exactly what the court did, but nobody should shade the fact that these are cases about thuggery, right? These are people going into businesses, targeting them, trying to hurt people who run businesses because of a disagreement over a pretty basic, moral question, right? The baker in this case, the cake designer is a Christian. And if you're a Christian, the word Christian, of course, means Christ-like. And so you probably read the Bible, and if you read the Bible, you probably notice that there's some moral rules in the Bible, and that the institution of marriage is a really basic, fundamental thing that actually implicates the design not just of men and women, but the design of the relationship between human beings and God the Creator, and all of them. I mean, there's all of this richness in the Bible. A lot of people don't understand this, frankly. You see a lot of media reports about this, and they don't get why marriage is important. They think it's just about, people don't like a certain activity or a certain kind of people, and a lot of folks, especially a lot of the folks who write the media stories today, are very ignorant of some of these basic historical texts like the Bible, which, to them, I mean, you think about it, right? Even if you're not a Christian, if you're sort of living in Western civilization, if you're ignorant of the Bible, you're at least ignorant of an important historical text, right? Okay, that's enough background on this case. The couple walk in Colorado. They say, we want a cake for our wedding. The baker says, gay weddings aren't even legal in Colorado, and besides that fact, you can buy anything that's out on the shelves, but I'm not going to design you, build for you a wedding cake, because that would violate what I believe. And these guys, of course, go and use Colorado's administrative process to punish people, to punish this owner of Masterpiece Cakeshop. And the case works its way up to the Supreme Court. They heard argument, handed down the decision today. And the decision was 7-2 in favor of the baker. But you have to go, you can't stop there, right? You can't stop there. You have to actually look at what this case actually means, right? And not just stop there, because some people are out there saying, well, this is a great victory for religious liberty. It's a great victory for freedom of speech. It is a victory. It's not a great victory, but it is a victory for those things. It is a victory for religious free exercise. It is a victory for the freedom of speech, which has always been understood to be also the freedom not to speak, right? The freedom of speech also means that government can't come along, put a gun to your head, and say you have to say thus and such, right? That would violate your freedom of speech, just like government coming along, putting a gun to your head and saying you can't say something, right? Either one of those violates your freedom of speech. So those were the questions in this case. But another issue got strapped onto the case as it went along, and that was the question of whether Colorado's process was fair, or whether Colorado's process was tainted by anti-Christian bigotry, or animus. The court talks about animus here, which is fascinating. People who followed the law in this area will know there's an earlier case out of Colorado that hinged on this issue of animus. It was a different kind of a case, although it related to the same general social issue. I'm not going to go into that today, but it is a fascinating connection here, both of these cases coming out of Colorado and hinging on this issue of certain groups of Colorados being perceived by the Supreme Court as being mean. And in this case, it was a group of Colorado officials who actually were a part of the administrative process here, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, who heard this and said things that made it into the record that came across to the justices on the court, and at least 6 of the justices on the Supreme Court as being anti-Christian. Now, I know I said that there were the decision was 7-2, but the decision was 7-2 in this way. Justice Kennedy wrote the decision for the majority, which was joined by 5 other justices, and then Justice Clarence Thomas wrote a separate opinion that would come to the same conclusion on slightly different grounds. The only 2 justices who dissented in this case, the only 2 justices who basically said, not only were they not going to stand up for freedom of speech or free exercise of religion, but they also didn't have a problem with some of these anti-Christian views that were expressed by the decision makers in Colorado, were Justice Sotomayor, excuse me, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. All of the other justices, including Justice Breyer and Justice Kagan, 2 of the court's other staunch liberals, all of the justices decided in this narrow way, and this is where the breakdown of the court was not narrow, right? 7-2 is not a narrow opinion in terms of the numbers, but the decision was narrow in terms of the rationale that attracted those 7 justices, right? 7 justices basically agreed that the Baker should win, and 6 of them agreed with that because they said that the process was unfair. So it's important. And look, this is something that the justices on the Supreme Court do all the time. They are actually supposed to decide cases on narrow grounds, right? So they were, in essence, really doing their job. If they felt that this was the narrowest grounds to decide this case on, then that was the appropriate thing to do. But the decision, the rationale is narrow. The Baker won, the thugs lost, and look, well, I said enough about it. It really is. You just think about. People going around trying to identify people who say, I'm willing to serve you in my business, but I'm not willing to participate in this one thing because I have a strong, think about the mentality, right? It's a thug mentality that motivates people to do that, and it is tragic to see 2 members of the Supreme Court of the United States embracing that thug mentality, but there you go. Okay, more good news. More good news. There will be fewer, if there were any before, there will be fewer California bureaucrats in Oklahoma going forward than there have been in the past, right? Isn't that good news? It's been reported. Have you seen the story out there, right? California has added Oklahoma to this long list of states where California says we will not allow state-funded, state employee travel to any state that California, the California Attorney General believes has enacted a law that in some way is discriminatory, right? And so, look, I say, this is a wonderful thing, right? We should have done this. We should have done this ourselves, right? What's the legislature been doing? Why didn't they pass a law banning California from sending bureaucrats to our state, right? We had to wait for California to do it? Okay, seriously though, this is the most grotesque kind of political grandstanding, and I can prove it. You know what the proof is? That California Attorney General Xavier Becerra, is it Becerra? Becerra, is just grandstanding, right? It doesn't, the one thing it doesn't cover? It doesn't cover the biggest area of state-funded travel, and that is state-run college and university sports programs, right? You might have seen this mentioned in some of the news stories, right? I put this out on Twitter, and we should all be harassing the officials in California, right? If they mean it, if they really mean it, they should not send their sports teams to any of these states. It's a long list of states, by the way. Oklahoma is, I forget where we are on this list, but there's already, I think, a dozen states on the list, and they added one more. Let's see, I have the other list of states: Alabama, Kansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Texas. Not quite a dozen, and now Oklahoma. But I think this is great, and I just think, but we should be telling them, right? Have the conscience, the courage of your convictions, right? If you're going to do it, don't just grandstand. Actually do it. Right? And, have your college sports teams default on all of those games, right? Because that's what would happen. But they're not. It's just grandstanding. That's all that's going on there. And so fine. Okay, we can understand that. Last story for the morning and for the afternoon. The New Yorker had a hit piece on Oklahoma that this was brought to my attention by the good folks up at Tulsa Today, and they were asking. They said, you know, we need to have we need a response to this. Hit piece from the New Yorker about Oklahoma and education funding in Oklahoma. And I started reading this. I thought, wow, what a great example. So California doesn't like us. New York doesn't like us either. What a great example of just how disingenuous going through this story. Let's pull, I've got 3 screen grabs from this that have more than 3 errors, omissions, lies. Let's not call them lies. Let's just be nice. We'll just call them errors and omissions in this New Yorker piece here. Let's pull up the first one. So this is about the teacher walkouts and how Oklahoma is going to become a blue state because the New Yorker says that we should. And the first thing here I thought was so funny. You can see there, I underlined it. Republican-dominated Oklahoma legislature offered teachers a pay raise around $6,000 a year. I thought this was funny, first of all, because the legislature didn't offer a pay. They passed a pay raise in law, right? They actually passed it wasn't a negotiation. But here's where things get more obvious, right? The next line here, it funded the raise with an assortment of tax bills, most of which disproportionately affected the poor: cigarette, diesel, Amazon sales tax, ball and dice, hotel, motel. Well, wait a second here. Now, first of all, the hotel motel thing got repealed, right? But second of all, what was the most controversial part of that tax package was the gross production tax on oil and gas going from 2% to 5% on the first 3 years of wells. This was the biggest piece of this. And what does the New Yorker do? If the New Yorker mentioned that, right, it would upset the storyline, right? The storyline here is that Oklahomans hate poor people and they never raise taxes, and when they do raise taxes, they only raise taxes on poor people, and oil and gas controls this, all this stuff. And so to admit this fact, especially up front toward the beginning of this article, would upset the narrative. The writer here has a narrative that she's already decided on. She's not going to let the facts get in the way of the story. So she's not going to tell us anything about that. The other thing, I mean, look, this is one paragraph of a very, very verbose story here. Also goes on to say the legislature hadn't passed a tax increase since 1990. You know, if you watch this show, that's not true. The legislature has passed tax increases, also passed lots of fee increases, also passed lots of backdoor tax increases. So, you know, anyhow, that's not true, but we all know that. Okay, let's go to the next image here, the next screen grab from this article. It's so long I had to do screen grabs rather than scrolling through it here. The next one says, Oklahoma has essentially been under single-party rule for about a decade. Stop, hold on a second here. Yes, that's true, okay? But you could also say, Oklahoma has been under single-party rule for about a century. Right? Again, the reporter has a story she wants to tell, and she's not going to let the facts get in the way. She's just going to trickle out these little details that work with her story and leave all of the other things that would upset her story. She's going to leave all of that out, right? Oklahoma is a state that was run completely by the Democratic Party for generations and generations, went through this tiny interregnum of Republicans gaining some legislative seats. Well, Republicans taking the governorship and gaining in the legislature, and then losing the governorship, and then taking over the legislature, and then finally winning everything, right, from the top to the bottom of the ballot, pretty much. But like, she wants to focus narrowly on that and ignore the fact that, you know, all of the government structures in Oklahoma were built by the Democrats, and that's not a partisan statement; it's a factual statement, right? Okay. Let's pull that one back up because it's got another falsehood in it, and I think this is funny. She takes this from Governor Fallon, right? She hates Republicans, but she takes this fact from Governor Fallon that state agencies have been cut between 10 and 30%. You know, if you watch this program, why that's not true, right? Sure, the general revenue fund revenue that goes into some of those agencies may have dropped that much, but actual agency budgets and actual agency spending have actually gone up, right? Now, not in every case, but in most cases, have actually gone up, right? I mean, we know, I mean, what's funny is right? She won't, the writer here won't tell you that she's getting this information from the Fallon administration, but I suspect that's where it all comes from, right? Governor Fallon's been arguing for tax increases and has been, we talked about this last week on the show, has been using these grotesquely misleading numbers from state agencies that focus on one narrow little part of their budget and ignore all of the rest of it. Okay, let's pull this up one more time. I told you, I've got all these screen grabs, and I have 3 screen grabs, but I think we have like 10 different, we're not going to call them lies, errors and omissions in this New Yorker hit piece on Oklahoma. Let's pull that one back up, and you can see there a reference to our protection of taxpayers that we put in the state constitution. In 1992, a law was passed. She's not going to tell you that it was passed by voters. She wants to make it sound like it's the legislature's fault. Of course, that would be awkward because the legislature then was all Democrats. But so she's just going to leave it vague, right? You're not going to say it was voters. Not going to. In 1992, a law was passed requiring that any bill to raise taxes receive the assent of the governor and 3/4 of the legislature. Look, I don't know if the reporter here is actually intending to omit important facts about this. She's probably not an attorney. She probably never actually read the state constitution. I assume she's just going off of what she's read from other reporters doing the same thing that she does, which is writing the story they want to write, not writing the facts. But I know that what the Constitution actually says is tax increases have to go to voters. And if you don't want them to go to voters, then you have to pass them with 3/4 supermajorities in the legislature. But the default is tax increases go to the voters, right? And if you got politicians who are too lily-livered, yellow-bellied to send tax increase packages to the voters, right? That's not our problem. That's not the law's problem. That's somebody's problem, but it's not our problem. It's not the law's problem. And reporters ought to actually describe what the Oklahoma State Constitution says accurately and not just make things up or leave things out to satisfy their storyline. Okay, our last slide here. This one is just a straight up factual error in this article, but she uses a quote to do it so that she can always come back and say, well, it's just what this person said, and I quoted him. I don't know. I mean, I'm just a reporter. You can't expect, a young reporter to actually know anything. No, we don't really expect you to know anything, but we are going to point out when you get it wrong here. You can pull this up. It's a quote from a teacher who was at the Capitol who says, I've been teaching for 22 years, and my base salary is $38,000. Sad thing about this is it's pretty easy to actually go and discover what the base salary is for a teacher who's been teaching for 22 years, and it's over $41,000. In other words, $3,000 more than he says here. And if he has a master's, it would be over $4,500 more, right, than what he says here. And that's before the raise, which was passed, by the way, before this quote was taken, right? So after the raise, you got to add like $7,000 to that. I mean, this is roughly a $10,000 lie. I'm going to call this one a lie. Somebody's lying here, and it gets passed along in the New Yorker, right? This is the kind of stuff that we have to put up in Oklahoma. Now, what's the answer? What do we do about it? I mean, first of all, we just have to accept it. Folks in California, folks in New York, especially media elites and political elites in places like that are never going to give us a fair shake. Why? Because Oklahoma is a kind of diversity that they can't tolerate, right? Oklahoma, limited government, trying to hold down taxes, trying to allow bigger freedom and littler government, trying to run things that way according to those principles. They don't like it. They don't accept it. They don't want to tolerate it, and they're going to attack it any chance they get, and they're not going to be honest. And one thing that we have to do is resist the Chamber of Commerce impulse to think that if we just compromise on this and compromise on that, we just pretend like we don't have a disagreement here and there, and we're just nice to everybody, that everybody will be nice to us. That's not the way it works, right? There's no set of policy compromises that's going to get the New Yorker to write nice things about Oklahoma, right? They want not policy change, they want political change. They want people who are like them to run government, not just in New York, not just in California, but everywhere. Right, and now I want to flip this around because this is one thing that conservatives should be better at, right? Let California be California, as long as they keep it there. Let New York be New York. Let Vermont be Vermont, right? Let's let Bernie Sanders have his little fantasy world in the real world and show everybody why that doesn't work, right? I mean, this is the system of federalism that conservatives and constitutionalists should be able to accept. And I think we largely do. We certainly do a lot better than the folks do in, than the political elites in California, the media elites in New York, right? But look, I mean, and we're going to cover the results. You notice what we do on the show. We do blue state blues. We don't look at policy in California or policy in New York or Connecticut or Washington State or wherever and say, look at that policy, it's dumb. We say, look at the effects of that policy and how they hurt people. You notice that? That's how we cover it here on the Trent England Show. That's what federalism it allows us to do, right? It allows us to look around, not just applying our preconceived notions, but actually looking at what happens, at the results of policies in other places. Sometimes we can learn from them. We've talked about education funding policies in other states and how Oklahoma can actually learn things from other states and how they do education policy. We look at tax policy and find lessons in other states for how we can make things better here in Oklahoma. And we look at other states, and it just happens that oftentimes it's California. We look at other states and notice how the policies that they enact in those places wind up being disastrous. California has the worst poverty, according to PolitiFact. California does, in fact, have the worst poverty in the country when you adjust for cost of living. Of course, PolitiFact says you can't adjust for cost of living in red states, but in blue states you can, so we can use that from PolitiFact. Thanks for watching the show today. We have a great show coming up tomorrow. Trace Savage from NonDoc is going to be with me to talk a little bit about the state auditor's race. NonDoc is sponsoring a forum for state auditor candidates. I'm sure that will be interesting. That's coming up this week, so Trace is going to give us the details on that tomorrow on the program, and I'm going to ask him some questions about the health department as well. He's had great coverage of that scandal that is still unfolding, by the way. The grand jury report is not the end of the story. In a way, it's just the end of the beginning of that whole saga with the State Department of Health. One suspects that the federal government will, they'll have their own findings of fact, but I believe that they're actually going to require Oklahoma to either pay some money back. They may have federal criminal charges. We'll see. It could take more months for all of that to unfold. But Trace is going to be with me tomorrow. Thanks for watching the show today. Remember, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play Music Store. We're on SoundCloud, Stitcher. I'm on Twitter at Trent England. You can go and find my tweets about some of the stories we talked about today. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/OCPAthink, facebook.com/Trent England Show. And the whole show archive is up at OCPAthink.org. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.